Hello, and thank you for stopping by the 741 channel. Today we're going to take a look at my Craftsman snowblower, and specifically we're going to take a look at replacing these auger guides that are on either side of the auger. And we're also going to replace the slides that are under here as well. These are worn out on my machine. So let's get started. Here's a look at the parts that I'm going to be working with today. And I'll leave links for all of these in the description below in case you want to check them out. But make sure you get the right part for your machine because applications will vary. You can see here that I've got two of these black auger bearings, part number 9517MA. So here's a look at the bearing itself. Now I wouldn't exactly call this a bearing, I'd call this more of a bushing myself. So I've got these two sliders here also. Now these are not the exact part that belongs on my machine. When I looked up the exact part number for my machine, the sliders were very expensive for what they were. And so I did a little checking and I found that these should work on my machine, and I think they were less than half the cost of the ones that are specified for my machine, and I think these might even be a little bit more rugged. So I think we're going to do okay with these. And then lastly, I got a set of new shear bolts. I haven't had proper shear bolts on my machine in years, and since I was ordering these parts, I just decided to get some actual correct shear bolts, since I now have a paved driveway and I shouldn't be going through these things like candy like I did before my driveway was paved and I was hitting a lot of stones and things like that. So to start off, the first thing that I'm going to do is remove these old shear bolts that I have on my auger. I'll zoom in on that one and you can see that that's not a proper shear bolt. What that is just a plain old cheap Chinese bolt that I took out of something else, and it's got a real low shear strength, so it works effectively the same way as a regular shear bolt. It's just a little bit longer. So now that I've got the shear bolts off, I'm going to remove the 3 bolts that hold the bushing on.
I'll be back, that's all right?
Yep, that's fine.
Oh, I forgot my keys.
What I'm going to try and do now is pry this sheet metal away just enough so I can slip this out of here so that I don't have to take anything further apart. So here's a look at the old bushing. But you can see the problem with this is that the mounting ears are cracked. And I think that's because I've really abused this machine over the years with my dirt driveway and the large stones getting jammed up in the auger. In fact, I'm surprised I haven't had to replace these before now. So anyway, let me get the one from the other side off and then we'll put the new ones on. So now that I have that bushing loose, this one ought to come off easier. Yep, just slid out. Here's a look at the bushing from this side. You can see it suffers from the same problem as the other one. The mounting ears are cracked. Otherwise, it seems like it's in pretty decent shape. So here's the new, well, I'm going to call this a bushing. I'm not going to call it a bearing like they call it on the package. But anyway, here's the new one. I'm going to put it in the machine. And installation is really just the opposite of removal. We just got to put it in there and bolt it on. The only difference here is that I've added some chassis grease inside of here. I noticed there were traces of it in the old ones, so I thought it would be a good idea to add a little bit of new grease to these. So let's go ahead and get these on. It shouldn't take too long. Okay, so we got the first side done. A couple of things I want to mention is that it would have been better for me to put the bolts in all 3 holes before I tightened up the first one, because this thing tended to kind of move around on me a little bit. And the second thing I want to mention is that you don't want to tighten these nuts up too much. Of course, especially with this being plastic, it could crack again. So I've got it snugged up, but it's not overly tight. We should be good to go. So now we're going to move over and install the bushing on that side. So this side's probably going to be a little harder to install. So we'll just get the pipe out again and see if we can do that trick. Now that we have the bushings all set, let's put some proper shear pins in here now. The diameter of the shear bolts that I ordered here happens to be just a little bit too big for my machine. I guess you win some and you lose some, so on this case I lost. I'm going to have to order some smaller bolts, or just reuse some of those old bolts that I've been using for years. They worked just fine. Well, since I can't do the shear bolt right now, let's move on to changing the slides over here. So here's a look at the sliders. This keeps the front of the machine a little bit elevated above the ground. You can see here that it's just held on with a couple of bolts, and they're adjustable up and down. Now you also may notice that this slider, and of course the one on the other side, are mounted on backwards. The lip that's here should actually be facing out. But I did this back when I lived at another house that had kind of a narrow walkway, and I wanted to make sure that I got my snowblower path right up to the edge of the walkway. But now that I don't have to worry about that particular walkway anymore, I'm going to reverse these back the way that they should be. Anyway, let's pull these off. So here's a look at the slider. You can see what I mean. This is the face that should be facing out. In other words, it should be on the machine this way. And you can see the reason I want to change it is because this one's pretty worn out. You can see the metal is all worn away and it's all bent up and sharp and broken and jagged. So it's time to put some new ones on this machine. So here's a look at the new one, the new slider that I'm going to put on this machine. And you can see that it's different than the old one. The reason for that is that this original equipment part here, when I looked up the price for it, it was really kind of outrageous. In fact, I was able to get 2 of these for less than they're charging for 1 of these. So what I did basically is I took the measurement of how far apart these slots are, and basically just found another part that was cheaper that had that same slot spacing and ordered that. So I don't know exactly what machine these would go on, but they ought to work on mine. Now the other thing you can see is that these are quite a bit shorter than the original. Now that's not going to be an issue for me, because before I paved my driveway I did have to keep the machine up quite high so that I didn't suck up all the rocks and junk into the machine. And even with it way up high, it still kind of tended to suck some rocks and things in. But now that I have a paved driveway, I can lower this down quite a bit. So the fact that this one is a little bit shorter isn't going to be an issue. Anyway, let's put this on the machine and see how it works. So the first thing I've done is I've raised the machine up on this pipe here so that I can let the new slider kind of hang down and not touch the ground, so I can get it lined up on here properly. So now I'm just going to put this on here. Okay, so I've got the bolts snugged up by hand, and now I'm just going to slide these up and get this thing kind of positioned where I think is going to be best. Okay. I've got this positioned about where I want it. It's maybe about 1/8 of an inch or so below the bottom of the sheet metal here. So that should make the snowblower ride nice and low and give me a good clean swipe on the driveway. So now I'm going to tighten these up, and I'm going to try and hold the bracket in place, because as I tighten it, it's going to want to kind of try and pivot. And the other trick I'll do to kind of mitigate the pivoting is just tighten it a little bit each time and kind of go back and forth between each bolt. So I've got the sliders all set now, and I ended up lowering them quite a bit, maybe almost a ½ an inch. So I didn't like the way this was sitting with these so close to the edge of the metal. It was basically just holding this thing too low, and the back of the throat was going to end up scraping on the driveway, and I think that was going to cause too much resistance. So what I ended up doing was I pushed these down about a ½ an inch or so to lift everything up. So I still may need to do a little fine tuning with this once I use it for the first time in some snow and see how it goes. But these are easy enough to adjust. You can see it's just 2 bolts on each side, and you can kind of slide them up and down. And I've got plenty of room to go either way on these still. So aside from getting some shear bolts that'll fit on this machine, I think we're pretty much done with this project and ready for the first snowfall of the season. If you enjoyed this video or found it helpful, please give it a thumbs up. And if you'd like to leave a comment or subscribe, feel free to do that as well. Thanks for watching.